Every second, global enterprise networks process a chaotic collision of financial records, medical histories, IP addresses, and aggregate statistics. Information privacy functions as a rigorous operational framework, dictating exactly how this data is collected, handled, and destroyed throughout its entire lifecycle. Historically, the law took a much simpler view. In 1890, Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis defined privacy as the right to be let alone. That definition eventually branched into 4 distinct classes of protection: bodily privacy, territorial privacy, communications privacy, and information privacy. Of those 4, only information privacy is tasked with governing the architecture of global enterprise data systems. To understand how these systems stay compliant, we must construct a modern privacy architecture from scratch, starting with the regulatory trigger, moving to operational rules, and finishing with global enforcement models. Failing to conceptualize privacy as a fundamental engineering and architectural requirement is the primary reason organizations face catastrophic compliance failures. Our architecture starts with a boundary. Data protection laws activate when the information crossing your servers is classified as personal information, or PII. For data to cross this threshold, it must be linked to an identified or identifiable individual. Strip away those linking elements, and the remaining aggregate data falls outside regulatory scope. But the line separating anonymous data from personal information shifts every time technology advances. Take the IP address. Early dynamic IPs changed constantly, making it hard to tie numbers to a person. Today, IPv6 generates static addresses from device hardware. This permanently ties the device to a human, pushing it across the regulatory threshold. Complicating this further, global jurisdictions place this boundary in different locations. The European Union treats IP addresses strictly as identifiable personal data, while various U.S. federal agencies remain divided on the issue. To navigate this friction, engineers rely on pseudonymized data, a temporary state where direct identifiers are replaced with unique numerical codes, masking the individual. However, pseudonymization is reversible. If an adverse reaction occurs during a clinical drug trial, researchers can use a secure key to re-identify the patient and intervene. Warning tone. Treating the definition of identifiable data as a fixed legal term rather than a moving technological target creates a significant compliance trap for IT professionals. The moment data crosses that identifiability threshold, every organization interacting with it adopts a strict legal role. The process begins with the data subject, the individual originator of the information, like a retail customer or a hospital patient. Data flows from the subject to the data controller, the central authority carrying the primary legal burden. They alone determine why and how data is processed. To handle operations like payroll, the controller delegates specific tasks to satellite data processors. These processors operate under severe constraints. They are strictly prohibited from performing any additional data processing outside the exact scope permitted by the controller. Accountability flows strictly down this chain. If a processor decides to use the data for a new purpose without authorization, they immediately inherit severe legal liability for exceeding their mandate. To keep these controllers and processors aligned, the industry relies on a universal rules engine known as Fair Information Practices, or FIPS. Originally drafted by the U.S. government in 1973, these guidelines have been refined over decades by international bodies like the OECD and APEC into a globally recognized framework. This blueprint illustrates a 4-quadrant matrix mapping out all global FIPS implementations. The top left quadrant outlines individual rights, mandating clear notice, secure user consent, and direct access for data subjects to review their records. The top right quadrant establishes controls. This dictates the technical safeguards to prevent unauthorized access and the verification processes necessary to maintain accurate, high-quality data. The bottom left quadrant governs the information lifecycle. This operates through strict gated checkpoints. An organization can only collect what was noticed, must delete data once the purpose is fulfilled, and can only disclose it with explicit consent. The final quadrant focuses on management. This assigns internal administrative accountability and demands proactive monitoring and enforcement procedures to handle privacy disputes. While global laws vary, mastering this underlying FIPS matrix provides professionals with a universal baseline for compliance engineering. With the internal rules established, We have to examine how geographic jurisdictions wrap this FIPS baseline in different macro-level legal architectures. The most prominent approach is the comprehensive model, utilized heavily by the European Union. Under this architecture, the government establishes universal data protection requirements that apply uniformly across both the public and private sectors, overseen by a central data protection authority. In contrast, the United States relies primarily on the sectoral model. Instead of a single overarching law, the government enacts bespoke legislation targeting specific industries. A hospital is governed by HIPAA, while a credit rating agency answers to the FCRA. The architectural flaw in the sectoral approach is the creation of regulatory gaps whenever technology outpaces industry-specific legislation. When commercial drone technology arrived, it introduced high-definition aerial surveillance to civilian airspace. Because drones did not fit neatly into historical sectoral categories, they operated in a legal gap unaddressed by specific privacy laws. Operating inside a comprehensive regime means navigating heavy, universal friction for every data operation. Operating inside a sectoral regime demands constant vigilance to spot unregulated gaps and overlapping enforcement authorities. By connecting these layers, we reveal the complete privacy architecture. The machine activates the exact moment a data packet links to an identifiable person and crosses the regulatory threshold. Once inside the system, the data controller and processor are inextricably bound by the rigid lifecycle constraints of the four-quadrant FIPS framework. And the ultimate weight of that compliance burden is determined by geographic reality, whether the organization is operating inside a unified comprehensive boundary or navigating the fragmented blocks of a sectoral model. The effective privacy professional architects resilient data systems capable of dynamically adapting to shifting definitions while satisfying global operational constraints.